Second letter to Ed Wilson, September 2nd, 2015. So what I'm going to do here is read the intro, and then I'm going to break up the different parts into different audio tracks so they're easier, more like an index. There's 4 boundaries here and a number of other things. So they're going to be shorter audio clips so they're easier to reference. But here's the intro. In my letter to you of September 14, 2013, which I have attached again here, I wrote that I would like to meet with you to discuss my concerns and questions about our stand that we are scripturally prohibited from seeking medical aid. During the past 2 years since I wrote that letter, and while waiting for the opportunity to discuss it, I have continued to pray and study the scriptures that seem to pertain to the subject. This has resulted in my current letter, which repeats some of the same questions and comments as in the letter of 2013, but which also lays out the scriptural framework, which I refer to as boundaries, that seems to apply to our relationship with God, since abstaining from medical aid is not a matter of moral duty to our fellow man, but rather is something that is considered a part of our relationship with and sacrifice to God. When I was young, I heard that Earl Nightingale had told a story in his syndicated radio broadcast in reference to the 1956 typhoid outbreak at Monarch Springs that resulted in several deaths. Nightingale told the drowning man story about the man who was caught at home with flood waters rising. The man is warned by authorities to get out, but he informs them that he's trusting God to save him, and therefore he refuses their advice to leave. Soon the water begins to rise, and the man is forced to the second floor of his home. A boat comes to the window of the second floor, and rescuers urge the man to get in the boat and be saved. The man replies as he did to the first rescue attempt, and tells the rescuers that his trust is in God alone, and he refuses help. Next, the water rises to the top of the house, and the man is forced onto the roof. At this time, a helicopter appears overhead, and a rope is dropped to the man, but he refuses to climb aboard, and he shouts to the rescuers again that he's trusting God. The man drowns, and when he meets God, he asks God why he did not save him. God responds, "I sent people to you 3 different times to save you, but you turned them all away." So that's the story. That was Earl Nightingale, who was a radio show host and motivational speaker who was extremely popular, kind of like Paul Harvey back in the day. Well, I pondered that story when I was young, and I concluded that we agree in every respect with Earl Nightingale, and all the rest of the world for that matter, about what God would expect us to do if we were in a house with flood waters rising, and that the only reason we don't also agree when it comes to accepting life-saving medical aid is that God requires us to shun the aid, even if it's readily available and thoroughly proven to cure what is ailing us, and even if refusing medical aid costs our life. And this was evidently what Earl Nightingale felt had happened in 1956, and which moved him to hold the saints up to ridicule in this manner. But I never found anywhere in the scriptures where God had given an order to die rather than accept medical aid, nor any unfavorable reference to self-help or medical aid for that matter, and would like your help to enlighten me on where we get that authority, especially in light of the scripture which sets boundaries for acceptable religious expressions, those prohibiting testing God, and the scriptures that clearly set out God's attitude about causing death and attributing it to religious expression, and the scriptures which define that non-action is equivalent to action that causes what could have been prevented. As you remember, I joined in the legal research in preparation for Redacted. Now, I want to say here, anyone who has the original letters will know they had quite a few anecdotes in them. And ministers who did not find the time to point out any objections to any of my scriptures, they found the time to indicate that they were offended at some of the things that I had written, some of the anecdotes. So there was one in there about a young lady who came to church on Sunday and got saved. She was instructed regarding divine healing. She stopped taking insulin. She lasted until Wednesday morning and died. There was another one, and Angela Gillenbeck refers to this story. So you'll read Angela Gillenbeck about someone that she hopes gets help in her soul before she meets the Lord. She's talking about a person that I told the story that they were in a car wreck. So when they landed in the hospital because of the car wreck, they tried to see what else they could get done while they were there. And I said, under a waiver of the normal rules. Well, some people who were close to that situation were offended by that. And so I just went through, and if you get a later version of the letters, you'll see a bunch of redacteds in there. And then for the website, I just eliminated a bunch of them. So here it says, I joined in the legal research and preparation for redacted trial. That was Anita Williamson, after the death of her son. And as part of that research effort, I visited the law library in Los Angeles and public libraries elsewhere, and I pulled microfilm of historical documents to help in her defense. And I had access to many, if not all, other documents that were compiled by you. The reason I said that is Ed Wilson was in California during this time, and he had a box of documents, just a bunch of stuff, and I had custody of that for a bit. And I searched through everything we had, and I was specifically looking, what are we going to come up with to convince a jury that we are required, we have no choice. Let's see, around her defense. And it says, I had access to the documents that were compiled by you, whoever else was working on this case. But the defense seemed to just revolve around the fact that Jesus heals, and that we are justified in withholding medical aid from ourselves and our children because Jesus heals. I don't recall that the case was made as a defense in court, but it is made nevertheless from our pulpits that we're not only justified in abstaining from or withholding medical aid, but are required to do so by Scripture, even if death results. What I have found in Scripture suggests that mankind has always reached out to a higher being, and that God knew people might try atrocious things to acquire favor or power from God, and that God therefore defined boundaries of acceptable acts of worship and sacrifice and devotion. That's the end of this. We're going to start with the boundaries on separate tracks for those.